was late December in a small Texas town. We had just received 5 inches of snow earlier in the day. I can't remember what time it was. All I remember is that it was dark out and I was playing in my bedroom. It's important to note that my bedroom was made up of 2 rooms, a mudroom with a door that led out to the front, and then my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with a window in the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the frontmost room in the house, with my parents' room being in the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt something weird, like something was watching me. I turned to face the door and looked straight up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I stared, looking for any reason to feel unsafe and run away. After a while, I was sure that there was nothing, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I got the same feeling again. I didn't look at the door this time, but instead turned away with my back facing the door. I was just hoping it was all in my head. Just then, there was a noise at the door, like the doorknob had been touched. I was still turned around with my back facing the door. I was completely frozen still, with the metal sound of the doorknob in the background. It was moving. I didn't know how or why, but it was moving, slowly turning and testing the lock. I wanted to move, but I was frozen. It was like someone glued every joint in my body. My chest felt like there was a car parked on it. Suddenly, the knob started turning with a great force. This door was one that had to be locked with a skeleton key, so the knob inside could turn and open freely. Luckily, there were 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side had just figured out that the knob was free to open. As soon as I heard the knob turn all the way, I sprung up to the wall about 5 feet from the door, my back to the wall. The door fell silent. I found myself glued to the wall, unable to move. Then, the knob turned slowly. I remember watching, waiting for it to turn all the way. When it did, whoever was on the other side started trying to budge the door open. At first, it was easy going, but then they started pounding into the door with their foot. They only got 2 kicks in when I unfroze and screamed for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked what was wrong, and I said somebody tried to break in. I pleaded with them to go outside and check. They just told me my imagination was running wild, that it was probably just an animal, or just the old age of the house. They took one final look in my mudroom, not bothering to investigate any further. They just told me to go to bed. I laid in bed for hours. All I could remember was staring at the door from my bed, never taking my eyes off of the doorknob. And then, finally, I fell asleep. Suddenly, I was woken up by my parents who were very obviously distressed. My mom grabbed me by both my shoulders and got right in front of me. She asked me very sternly why I thought somebody tried to break in. When I told them this time, they seemed to listen. I was worried about how serious they were when they asked me about everything. When I was done explaining, they said they had to show me something. They took me out the front door and out to the front yard and pointed to my door near the driveway. You could clearly see boot prints in the snow. Walking along the street through our yard and straight to my window, then to my mudroom door where I had been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever came of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house ever again. I have never forgotten what it felt like as a child to go through this and to have my parents not believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and I'm very thankful for those deadbolts. This is a compilation of all the new stories uploaded to the channel this month, as well as some old ones you might have forgotten about. I hope you enjoy. I live in a major UK city, where the majority of apartment buildings in the city center have old school buzzers to let people on the bottom floor inside. So if someone downstairs at the main entrance wanted to come into my apartment, they would have to ring my buzzer so I could come unlock the door for them after they had confirmed who they are over the speakerphone. I usually feel pretty safe in my apartment. I live 1 floor up in a fairly quiet and affluent part of town. The most trouble we usually have is drunk students walking past to their dorms late at night. But this one experience has freaked me out so much that I'm relieved I'll be moving out in a few months' time. My friend was staying over after a fun night of drinking and watching TV, and we both headed to bed, her in the guest room and me in my room. We went to sleep around 11 p.m., only to be woken up around 4:45 a.m. to the sound of my buzzer going off. Over and over again. I waited to go over to the door for at least 10 minutes, and the person was just pressing it constantly. I finally mustered up the courage to leave my bed, and I headed over to the door to pick up the buzzer phone. The way the buzzer phone works is you can pick up the phone and speak to whoever's at your front door before you go unlock it to let them in. I thought it could have possibly been my roommate trying to get in because she was drunk after a night out, but I couldn't have been more wrong. "Hello? Who's there?" I said groggily as my friend joined me to see what was going on. All I heard down the line was heavy breathing, and then the person started banging on the entrance door. An immediate sense of dread filled me as I slammed down the phone without unlocking the entrance door. The buzzer continued to be pressed over and over, until, to my horror, I heard the sound of the entrance door being unlocked and opened. The next thing I heard in the building was a loud, gravelly, deeply aggressive voice screaming, "I'm going to kill you all. No one in this building is safe. You'll see hell soon." I remember being totally frozen in fear and looking out the peephole, but not seeing anyone there. Thankfully, this man hadn't climbed up to my floor yet, but just hearing these insane guttural threats be repeated in the middle of the night as he stomped around banging on the walls, I genuinely thought he was planning to kill someone, maybe even set the place on fire. I also felt super vulnerable because for whatever reason he decided to keep pressing my specific buzzer over and over again. He kept yelling his threats as me and my friends called the police, and so did everyone else in the building. They didn't arrive for around an hour, so we had to endure the insane threats for what felt like an eternity. But they managed to catch the guy, who turned out to be some local homeless man, probably on some kind of drug. This may all sound pretty trivial, but the whole situation happened in pitch black darkness when I was half asleep. It's easily one of the most terrifying moments of my life. When I was 13, I decided to skip a day of school because they were taking a boring field trip to a park. Instead of going to school that day, I stayed up late the previous night playing video games with my friends until around 5 a.m. Eventually, around 6 a.m., I fell asleep. 30 minutes later, I woke up, but I didn't know why, and I dozed off again. I woke up one more time, and again, fell back to sleep. Then, on the third time I woke up, I heard the doorbell ringing. I figured whoever it was would go away, so I went back to sleep once more. When I woke up again, I got out of my bed and checked the time. It was already 8:25 a.m. I thought the person at the door could have been my mom who came back because she or my siblings forgot something. With my phone in hand, I went downstairs. Through the front door window, I saw two silhouettes talking to each other. Both were males. I only caught bits of their conversation. I tried to peek through the windows, but I couldn't see much without risking being seen. So I went back upstairs and tried to call my mom's workplace to check if we were expecting anyone. Unfortunately, she didn't pick up. Meanwhile, the doorbell kept ringing the whole time. I tried calling her again, but still no answer. I think I heard the guys yelling something, and that's when things started to get serious. Suddenly, I heard them pounding on the door. My whole house felt like it was shaking. Panicking, I dialed 911, but messed up the number. I forgot to remove the first digit of my mom's phone number. As the pounding grew louder, I quickly locked my door and attempted to barricade it with my bed. However, the bed was too heavy to move over to the door in time, so I had to think fast. I decided to lift up my mattress and crawl underneath it. Just as I was getting under, I heard them break down my room door. I swear, the moment my mattress fell back onto my bed frame, they stormed into my room. I was genuinely terrified for my life. I stayed on call with the 911 operator, and after a while, the house fell silent. The police arrived and searched the entire house, but they didn't find anyone. And here's the creepiest part. Upon searching the house, no rooms were broken into other than my bedroom specifically. They didn't go for my siblings' rooms, even though both of them had expensive gaming consoles and laptops just lying around. No, they went straight for my room, broke in, and did nothing else. They didn't take anything. They simply broke in, went directly to my room, and then left. It still terrifies me thinking about it to this day. About 5 years ago, when I was around 23 or 24 years old, my husband and I lived in a modest split-entry home in a less than desirable area of a religious state. Despite the location, we had been fortunate enough to have friendly neighbors and hadn't experienced any major issues during our 2-year stay. Our house was situated across the street from a church, which seemed to create a false sense of security. The neighborhood was situated right off of a busy road, so it wasn't uncommon to see police officers overparked at the church taking care of their paperwork. Our backyard had 2 entrances into the house. One was a basement door with a sturdy steel storm door. The other entrance was a sliding glass door on the 2nd level, recently installed with tempered glass and built-in blinds that we typically kept closed. The backyard itself was enclosed by an 8-foot vinyl fence. Admittedly, our backyard was a bit of a mess. Our driveway was long, suitable for RV and trailer parking, with 2 sheds at the end and a 5-foot chain link fence separating our property from the church grounds behind us. These details are important to understand what unfolded later on. Although life was relatively calm, a series of unsettling events began to occur. A few weeks prior, a man just 3 streets away was tragically shot by individuals who knocked on his door late at night. Because this incident was so close to home, it was cause for concern. Then, one night, my husband's dirty and grass-covered shoes were stolen from our front porch. The theft left us feeling vulnerable and on edge. As avid PC gamers, my husband and I often indulged in all-night gaming sessions on weekends. Our basement doubled as our office/study, with a window facing the driveway. One night, while we were engrossed in our game, a white sedan pulled into our driveway. Its lights were beaming directly into our window. We couldn't understand why they chose our driveway when there was an empty church parking lot right across the street. This incident left us puzzled and uneasy. These incidents were beginning to take a toll on me, exacerbating my existing anxiety and paranoia. I felt like something terrible was looming on the horizon. I confided in my stepmom about my escalating concerns. Worried about my safety, she invited me over to her place. It was just a short 5-minute drive away. As soon as I entered her house, my brother led me to my dad's room, where the gun safe was located. He handed me a gun. While I had always been taught about gun safety, having a gun thrust into my hands was a sobering experience. My brother took the next 15 to 20 minutes to teach me how to load the gun and how to turn off the safety. Armed with my new protection, I headed back home. Less than a week later, a seemingly normal day unfolded. I was working from home, following my usual routine, and waking up and heading just 7 steps to my office downstairs. Since my stepbrother had given me a gun, it remained within my sight whenever I was home alone. The loaded gun and its accompanying magazine were either on the desk next to me or within arm's reach. Around 12:30 p.m., I decided to take a lunch break. Still being in my pajamas, I opted to shower and change into proper clothes. As I showered, I heard a loud bang coming from somewhere outside the house. The noise caught my attention, but I dismissed it. I assumed it must have just been the old water heater outside of the house. I finished up my shower and got back to work. I was chatting with a coworker on Skype when I suddenly heard a knock at my front door. The timing was odd, as I never answered the door during working hours. Ignoring it, I just continued with my conversation. Moments later, my heart dropped as I heard the doorknob of the basement door jiggling. Panic seized me. The knocking grew louder and more forceful, as if someone was trying to break in. With my adrenaline going crazy, I swiftly grabbed my gun from my desk, feeling its weight and coldness in my hand. I loaded it, sliding the magazine in and racking the slide as my brother had shown me. My hands trembled, and I stood frozen, paralyzed with fear, waiting for the basement door to give way. The intruder then stopped jiggling all the doors and started to look through all the windows. First, the bathroom window, then the bedroom window. They pounded on it relentlessly. The sound was reverberating throughout the entire house. Each strike felt like a punch in the chest. I called 911, and in a shaky voice I described what was happening to the dispatcher. I informed her of the gun I had in my possession, hoping she would understand the gravity of the situation. My heart was pounding in my ears as she assured me that help was on the way. The kicking and banging continued, growing more frantic with each passing second. My mind was racing, imagining what would happen if the intruder managed to break through the window or the door. Suddenly, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The intruder heard them, and in an instant, silence fell. The police arrived and checked out the scene. They confirmed evidence of an attempted break-in. The intruders had successfully kicked in the garage door and had sent a young teenager to check if anyone was home. When the police sirens got closer, they fled, leaving behind a money clip and a work badge in my backyard. The money clip contained a few crumpled bills, indicating that it was likely stolen. However, it was the work badge that caught my attention. It had a photo on it, and I couldn't help but wonder if it belonged to the man who had attempted to break into my house. The entire incident lasted about 15 minutes, but its impact on me was profound and long-lasting. In the aftermath, I found myself suffering from severe anxiety, haunted by the fear of another intrusion. I went to get professional help, and they prescribed me medication to help cope with the aftermath. To this day, I still have nightmares about what could have happened. This encounter happened to me this week. I remember feeling sick to my stomach, while tears ran down my cheeks into my beard. I was sitting in my car on the side of the highway around midnight in between two major cities in Europe. Maybe less than an hour earlier, I fought bitterly with my girlfriend. We both got mad at each other. She got passive-aggressive and I began to yell at her. I couldn't stand to be with her that evening, so I got my keys, slammed the door, and I drove off to my apartment in another city. I had to take a break during my drive home. The episode with my girlfriend woke emotions that were too great for me to ignore. So I stood there on the highway with my blinking light and no engine turned on. It was silent around me, except the occasional truck passing by and the constant clicking of the blinking lights. I decided to continue driving as the heavy flow of tears had stopped. I turned the key, but I couldn't turn it all the way. I retried. Nothing. The key was stuck again at the same position. I was stubborn and tried several times again, and failed. Thoughts of staying the night on the highway rushed to the forefront of my mind. I had foolishly forgot to grab my cell phone when I was storming out of my girlfriend's apartment. Now I had no means to contact the emergency services or roadside assistance. Now the clicking of the blinking light was like a constant blow with a sledgehammer to my head, so I shut it off. And only then did I realize just how dark it was around me. Trucks passed by me within the following minutes, but I did not want to step out of my car and wave one of the drivers over. I didn't trust them. Don't ask me why. I always hate when people freeze in the midst of a situation that requires action, so I stepped out of my car. It was slightly raining. Obviously I knew where I was, since I regularly drive on that highway back and forth, and I knew that 2 kilometers ahead was a highway exit, so I figured I'd walk on the side of the highway up to that exit. There was a gas station there, and I hoped the place would still be open, even shortly after midnight. So I closed my car door and began walking to the other side of the guardrail away from the road. The road was on the left, and on the other side were trees illuminated by the moonlight. I confess, I was scared. I had no particular reason to be afraid, but my mind would turn the shadows from the trees into men hiding there, watching me with intense-looking eyes and hands ready to grab me. After 15 minutes or so, I began to move up a small hill, and the rain turned into snow. It had already been snowing before, as the trees and the road were already all covered in white. After a while, I saw the exit in the distance. I reached it faster than I thought I would. I miscalculated the distance, but that was all right. I was happy to be close to light, people, and a phone that I could use. Right before the exit, there was a bridge that went over the highway. When I was about to pass under the bridge, I saw a person jogging on it. I stopped and looked up in surprise. I only made out a silhouette, yet I clearly saw a woman, a ponytail, small and athletic build, crossing the bridge. What woman would want to jog around midnight on a road close to a highway with a wooded area on both sides of the bridge? A few seconds later, she was gone. I looked if I could make her out within the darkness, but I couldn't. Still weirded out, I continued walking and passed under the bridge. A couple of meters further down the highway, I took the exit. Now, in order to take the exit by foot, I had to get over the guardrail. There were thick bushes too close to the side of it that I was on. So basically I was walking on the road down to the exit to the gas station. On the right side of me, behind the bushes, there was a trail. If you decided to walk up that trail, you'd arrive back at the bridge I mentioned. So I was walking down the exit road, slowly, because it was slippery, but also with a steady pace, because I didn't want to get hit by a passing car. And then it happened. Someone jumped on me from behind and pushed me face first into the ground in the middle of the road. I screamed in sudden terror and turned around, ignoring the pain in my chin and right ear. The person was already on their feet again. I screamed again in shock and surprise. It was the woman in her mid-20s wearing jogging attire, the same person I saw minutes earlier on the bridge. She shrieked, and with wide eyes and saliva dripping out of her mouth, she charged at me again. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my left eye. The woman began to scratch over my eyes and poked her fingers deep into my left eyeball. I stumbled backwards, and when she was running at me again, I threw her against the guardrail, with her back first. The sound of the impact was cringeworthy. I broke down in the middle of the road, clutching my left eye. Moments passed, and I wasn't attacked again. Against all the pain in my eye, I looked up through tears and saw the woman heading up the trail towards the bridge again, fast. Adrenaline shot through my body. The pain began to numb as I rushed down towards the exit road, falling on my rear several times during the process. I felt like a panicking animal. I just wanted to escape that place. I reached the gas station, basically jumping against the door to throw it open. The guy behind the counter was shocked to see me. I was bleeding quite a bit and my eye was swollen shut at that point. To make a long story short, the guy called the police and an ambulance. The officers searched the area, but found nobody. I'm at home now, and I'm still terrified. I just can't comprehend why that woman attacked me, but I know for sure she went for a run in the middle of the night just to find a victim like me. When I was in college, I worked at an after-hours emergency clinic. My shift ended at midnight, and since the stores were much less crowded at that hour, I often did grocery shopping then. It's important to note that I'm a female, and I was in my early 20s when this happened. I went to the local store one night after work, parked in a great spot since the lot was almost empty, and headed towards the store. As I was walking across the lot, I heard a male voice calling, "Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me." I looked to my right and saw a man sitting in a blue station wagon, about 5 spaces away from where I'd parked. Having my attention now, he says, "I'm sorry to bother you. My wife and I are trying to get home, but we've run out of gas. She's in the store now asking people for help. Would you spare a few dollars so we can get gas to go home?" Now, normally, I don't mind helping out someone who's down on his luck, but something felt just so nope about the situation. I replied that I was sorry, but didn't have any cash. I went into the store to grab the few things I needed, and the whole time I was inside, I just couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had. I was completely on edge by the time I made it to the checkout line. After I paid for my items, I started to walk out, but my body just didn't want to cooperate. I'd take a few more steps, and then I'd stop again. I turned back to the male cashier and said, "I know I'm about to sound like such a girl right now. Could you see if someone could walk me out to my car? There was a creepy guy out there earlier, and I just don't feel comfortable." He took some of my bags in his hands so it wouldn't be obvious that he was just escorting me, and said he'd walk me out since he didn't have any customers. To exit the store, you have to go through 2 sets of sliding double doors. We walked through the first set, and I stopped cold. The station wagon was now parked next to my car. I told the cashier this, and he told me that he wouldn't let anything happen to me. We walked through the second set of double doors and started walking toward my car. About this time, the station wagon starts up and the driver pulls out of the parking spot. It was then that I noticed that there was no wife in the car, but it was another man. I don't know what these guys were planning to do, and I'm glad I never had to find out, thanks to my impromptu bodyguard. To give some background, when this happened, I was still in high school. I was just returning from my girlfriend's house to pack my things and go visit my grandma. It had been a tradition since I was a baby for me to always spend the night with my grandma, and every Friday, spend some of Saturday morning with her before I go to hang out with my girlfriend or my friends. One Friday, I was getting home pretty late since the movie my girlfriend and I started ran past what it should have due to pausing it for drinks and snacks, etc. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I got back to pack my basic overnight bag. I finally left my house around 12:30 a.m. and started off to my grandma's. Shortly after I turned out of my neighborhood, out of nowhere, I just saw this guy on the side of the road. I'm sure he was there before, but when I noticed him, it seemed like he just came out of nowhere. Plus, I was tired as hell. When my headlights shined on him, I noticed his expression was very agitated. I slowed my speed a considerable amount to avoid possibly hitting him. Once my headlights had passed him, I looked behind me and noticed him running towards my car, fast. It was like he either wanted me to stop and make sure he was okay, or hit him and have to stop anyways. I figured he was just some drugged out weirdo and proceeded to continue driving. Very shortly from where this occurred, there was a stop sign. When I stopped at it, I decided just to take a peek in my rearview mirror to see where he was. The street I was on had lamps in certain sections, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, I just saw him standing in the middle of the road, staring at the back of my car. I stupidly decided to stay stopped and see how long he would do this for. It felt like hours, but in reality it was probably more like 2 minutes of him just staring at the back of my car while standing in the middle of the road. Once I decided I had had enough of his cracked out stare down, I took my foot off the brake and my car started to go forward further so I could get a good look at both ways of the road in front of me before I turned left. I still kept an eye on my rearview mirror, however, and as soon as I took my foot off the brake and my brake lights went off, this man started full-on quarterback sprinting towards my car. I've never seen a regular human that wasn't running a track race or something run with such urgency. It was like he wanted to catch up with my car before I turned. For what, I have no idea. Needless to say, I decided hell no and floored it to the road in front of me and made a sharp left turn while continuing to speed up. Once I could no longer see that intersection in my mirror was when I slowed down, but just slightly. This might seem trivial to some people, but for an 18-year-old high schooler, it was quite frightening. I called my mom and told her to make sure all the doors were locked. She even sent my dad up the road to try and find this nut, but he wasn't there by the time my dad arrived. I got out to my grandma safely and haven't had any encounters with that man since. So this happened in 2013 and I was 17 years old. My family was looking at this house and the owner showed up to talk with my parents about it. He seemed like a nice older man. He built the house himself. It was a pretty nice 2-story house overlooking a river. I was standing back watching everyone talk, and as the owner is talking and laughing, there's a break in the conversation. He turns away from my parents, and his expression instantly changes from happy to the most sinister and hateful scowl I've ever seen. I don't think he noticed me watching. I probably appeared to be on my phone as my head was down. As soon as he turned back, he instantly went back to smiling. It was so creepy, and honestly it made me feel sick. I told my mom, who said it was weird, but maybe he's just awkward. So we ended up buying the house, and we moved in. The next weekend, my family was going to church, but I didn't feel like going, so they left me at home, all alone. It was Sunday morning, about 11 a.m., when I heard really loud banging outside. It was rhythmic and coming from the side of the house. I was on the other side of the house, on the second floor. Honestly, I thought it might have been the wind. It was storming that day, and I didn't think much of it. It stopped after about 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, I hear walking around downstairs, chairs moving, kitchen cabinets opening, and the fridge opening. I immediately quietly go to lock my door, grab my baseball bat, and called 911. While I told them my address, I texted my mom and tell her someone is in the house and that I've called 911. At that point, the 911 operator said that there was someone 10 minutes out. I told her to quiet down because I heard steps walking towards the stairs. The house was basically so thin, I could track where he was in the house at all times. My mom texted me that she was on her way, that she was 30 minutes away. So here's a 17-year-old girl, 5'2" and 100 pounds, hunkered in her room, full well knowing that if he came in, he'd overpower me and take the bat. I was terrified. I heard him walk down the hallway towards my door. I saw the handle turn, and then stop. It was locked. I heard him stand there. He didn't move. I could hear his breathing. It felt like forever, but I really think it was about 10 seconds. I heard him turn and go back down. I heard the back door open and shut. And about 3 minutes later, the police pulled up. The 911 operator asked if I could let them in, or if they needed to force it. I knew he had left at that point, so I let them in. There was no one there. No sign of forced entry. Nothing. When my mom got there, she looked at my stepdad and asked him if he had changed the locks. He hadn't. I think the creepiest part, what really validated my story, was that my mom had just vacuumed the hallway, and there were shoe prints on the floor that were larger than anything anyone in our house wore. And the police hadn't been up there, and they just stopped right outside my room. I know it was the old man using his old keys to get into the house. He died about a year after that. Please, don't forget to change your locks. I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbor, who I will be calling Kay to respect her privacy. We had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We Googled the numbers on the pills to find most of them were antidepressants, but I cannot remember the exact names as this was about a year or so ago. But I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we started to find unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house these were coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbors building their new house there, but it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine, on the corner. Between our house and hers, there are 2 empty lots. The lot closest to our house was the one with the new house being built there. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents, I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what about, but apparently about nonsense things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard. Sometimes she would walk onto the lot and yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew of her and were afraid of her. Up to this point, I had never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I peek outside the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbors, so my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. A few minutes later, the blonde lady walks away, and then a couple come out of the unfinished house, and they get into their car parked on the street. I'm really confused at this point, especially when the man walks over to my door and rings the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted not to answer the door. My parents weren't home anyways, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walks back to his car, and from the window, I can see he's sitting on the driver's side doing something. He comes back with a note that he leaves on my door, and then he and his wife drive away. After I'm sure they're gone, I go to get the note and I read it. Apparently, my neighbors were checking out their new house when they saw Kay attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was. In a rush, I sent a picture of the note to my mom. I called her. She didn't seem that worried about it, but I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple times she was rummaging around our front flower beds too. There was one instance which really unnerved my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. Another neighbor, who lives across the alleyway from us, contacted my parents to let them know they had seen Kay looming around our back fence gate around 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbors were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing that we had someone essentially casing our house in the middle of the night was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I'll call Jay, somehow got into contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everyone was wanting answers as to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. Jay was able to give us a lot of information about Kay. Apparently her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the US, and her family had essentially placed her in this house away from the rest of them. They did not want to deal with her mental illness, but more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she's been unstable ever since. The reason why she wants to get into our backyard and keeps throwing stuff over the fence is because she believes her son is there. Not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage or his ghost is there or what, but that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she's stopped taking her medication and has just been throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January of 2020, when during one of her usual arguments with the construction workers, she pulled out a BB gun. She was already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she threatened to shoot them or if she actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with big guns. I'm thankful that my parents had been filing police reports, so when they came, they already knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I am both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis. After that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We hear she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behaviors that she used to. Almost every day, me and my parents see her walk our dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her. This story is told from the perspective of a woman. I just moved into a new house over the weekend, and just paid the first month's rent. I signed a year-long lease. The house itself is okay for being built in the 30s. Lots of work to be done. Weird layout, unfinished porch. Okay, it's a crappy house, but I had to take what I could get. When I saw the house posted on Craigslist, I immediately called the number listed and asked if I could view it that day or another day during the week. Right off the bat, the dude gave me a bad vibe. Not really creepy yet, but definitely annoying. We arranged to meet that Saturday so he could show me the inside of the house. He texted me every day, multiple times, to make sure you're absolutely certain that you want to view the house, because I don't want my time wasted. I assure him several times that I literally live 5 minutes away and I will be there on Saturday, no question. I should mention, I found the house for me and my elderly father who was in a wheelchair to move into. Come Saturday, the landlord was out in the yard waiting with a huge smile on his face. I waved hello and then went around to my passenger side door to help my father out of the car and into his chair. The landlord's face immediately changes into a scowl. As we approach him, my dad holds out his hand for a handshake when he just looks at me and says, I thought it was just you," while completely ignoring my dad. I awkwardly try to explain that I didn't think to mention it since he didn't ask. So he goes ahead and shows us the house. It's livable, so we give him the deposit. All is well. We moved over the weekend and paid the rent on the 6th. The landlord told me he would need access to the house today to do some plumbing work. I said no worries, but I'll be at work, so I'll leave the key above the door. I typically get off around 12:30 and told him as such. At around 10, he texted me again to confirm that I was absolutely not going to be there before 12:30 because of a safety hazard. I say yes, but I will be there after 12:30. Well, I actually ended up getting off pretty early that day. I was headed home at 11 and figured I'd just pop my head in and tell the landlord I was here, but I would stay outside. Now, remember when I said the layout of the house was weird? It's because the front door leads directly into a bedroom. My bedroom. There's another door to the left, and that was the living room, which led to the kitchen and the back room/bathroom. So I turned the doorknob, and it's unlocked. When I walked in, all I see is my landlord just hightailing it out of my room, through the living room, kitchen, back room, and out the back door, and I see his car race out of my driveway. Weirded out, I walk back into my bedroom, only to find my underwear drawer open and strewn about. My nightstand was open too. I don't know what to do at this point because I'm kind of stuck here, and it's hard finding housing with my credit, and even harder finding a place that's wheelchair accessible. When I was a 17-year-old moody teenager, I had a big argument with my mom one night about how she just didn't understand my needs and stormed out of the house. I was going to go for a walk, but it was freezing outside and really dark. So I did a quick walk of shame past my mom, grabbed my car keys and gave her a quick explanation of going on a McDonald's run before storming out yet again and giving the door a nice slam on my way. I jumped in my terribly old red Suzuki, cranked up the heat, and turned up my angry teen music and pulled out onto the dark streets. I drove to McDonald's in about 10 minutes and decided I was too mad to eat, and to calm down, I would go for a nice drive. Just down the road, another 15 minutes, was a stretch of pitch-black windy road that had lots of hairpin corners as it ran down a massive gorge with a small lake and a single-lane bridge going across it. If that doesn't sound scary enough, the road was called Galston Gorge. I knew this road very well. As I was making my way down the gorge, I turned a hairpin corner, and as my headlights swung around it, it lit up the road ahead, and I saw a black, medium-shaped object in the middle of the road. It made me jump, but I assumed it was just a dead kangaroo. As I got closer to this object, I realized, as I was almost on top of it, that it was a baby car seat, with the front covered in a blanket. I hit my brakes. I sat in my seat, staring at this baby seat, clenching my steering wheel. No way I was getting out when it was probably just a broken and dumped booster seat. I was about to pull off when I heard a noise. I turned my music down. The sound of my car engine made it hard to locate or recognize the noise. I wound my window down an inch and listened. It was a baby crying. No, crying was an understatement. This poor thing was screaming. I threw my seatbelt off and unlocked my door, grabbing the handle. Then I froze. Out of the corner of my eye, in the bush, I thought I saw something move. It was just out of reach from the light of my headlights. I took my hand off the door and slowly sat back into my seat, thinking. I remember my mom telling me never to stop my car at night, that if I see something that requires help, then to move on and call for professional help, because there's no situation that would require the help of a moody teenager. I was thinking all sorts of things. The baby needed help. It was a tiny, defenseless baby. What if that was a wild animal I saw in the trees coming to have a meal out of this little thing? And then I opened my car door, and as I did, my car let out a screech, causing whatever it was in the trees to jump. I slammed my door, jumping back in and sped up down the road. I got a few hairpin turns back up the gorge before I pulled out my phone. I still had no signal, as I was driving in a literal hole. I raced up to the top and back into the busy streets, and then called for the police. I told them what I saw, and they told me to go home immediately, to not stop whatsoever, and to keep my doors locked. They would call me tomorrow, but not to worry. The next morning, the Hornsby police called me, thanking me for my report. They said that a group of men have been placing baby seats in the middle of empty roads, covering them with a blanket which hides a speaker playing the sounds of children in distress, to try and lure young women out of their cars. They then drag these women away and take advantage of them, and then beat them, then driving away in the woman's car and leaving their victim to die in the bushes. They checked out the gorge, but the people had left. And they left in such a rush that they forgot their baby blue blanket with little gray elephants on it, the same one I described to the police as the one covering the baby seat. They said I was clever to keep going, and to never get out of my car late at night, no matter what tries to stop me. Two years ago, when my autistic daughter had trouble sleeping at night, I would toss her in the car seat and drive her around. She was only around 1.5 at the time. It was one of the only ways she would fall asleep soundly, and I lived with my parents in a nice neighborhood. So one night I'm driving, and my girl had finally fallen asleep. It was about 9 p.m. at this point. I was hungry and wanted to let her fall into a deeper sleep so I could move her. I went to get some food from a drive-thru and pull over onto a side street right next to the restaurant so I could eat. As I was finishing eating, I looked back to check on my kid. Then suddenly, these super bright headlights pull up behind me, a little too close. I waved apologetically, assuming whoever it was trying to park at the house I was currently in front of. So I pulled away and started down the street. Once I was at the end of the block and around the corner, I saw headlights again. No big deal. This is a semi-busy side street, so people cut down this way all the time. Only this person was tailgating me, like I wasn't moving fast enough. I got annoyed and changed lanes to get out of their way. But almost as soon as I did, they followed. At this point, I realized that the car was the same sedan that had pulled up behind me on the last street. But now they were way too close for me to see the make of this car, and the high beams were on, so I couldn't see anything behind me. I cursed myself for not paying better attention to the car before. I didn't want to be crazy paranoid, so I took a few unnecessary side streets and passed my neighborhood, only for this person to be behind me for every turn and every lane change. I started panicking and called my dad. I know I should have called the police, but I was only 21 and this was the first thing I thought of. He was at work, 30 minutes away. He had terrible reception and decided to call me back on the landline at his work, and was on the cell phone with the sheriff's department for our neighborhood, and they told me to drive to the station. It's been close to 40 minutes since this person started following me, and they just kept tailgating me closer and closer. I'm running lights and swerving around at this point, just trying to catch someone's attention. So I drive to the station, and no one was there. Not one car. No cruisers, and no one in the department office. They wanted me to pull into the lot and wait for an officer. I was alone, with my 1-year-old now fussing in the back seat, and there was only one way in or out of the parking lot. I noped past the station and told my dad to tell the officer on the phone that I wasn't going in because no one was there. I see a sheriff's car at the light ahead and start to honk and flash my lights as he drives across the intersection I'm driving to, and either misses what I'm doing or ignores it. It's now been a little over an hour, and this person has rear-ended me 4 times. Eventually, I saw another sheriff's car and just laid on my horn. I think he caught on because he busted a U and came back towards us. As he did, the car behind me disappeared into a mall across the street, and the officer followed. I was instructed to go back to the station and wait, so I did. And eventually I was waiting so long that I decided to go inside the station. I triple locked the door of my car because I was so terrified. The office had no one except an emergency phone on the desk. To wrap the story up, they made me feel crazy and said they never found the car, that all they could do was take a statement since technically nothing happened. and he offered to follow me and my daughter home, only to drive away as soon as I parked while I was taking my sleeping kid inside, shaking so hard I couldn't unlock the door. I ran upstairs to my mom's room. I shook her awake, sobbing, and told her what happened. It took me 2 days to sleep again at night, and to this day, I refuse to do night drives with my daughter. A few years ago, my sister decided to have a surprise 30th birthday party for her husband. Since he missed his senior prom, she decided to make that the theme of the party, and even booked the same hall his prom was hosted in when he was a teenager. Problem is, my brother-in-law grew up in basically the middle of nowhere, a small rural Missouri town that you have to leave the highway and travel down about 5 miles of heavily wooded back roads to get to. On top of being so isolated, there's a rather large heroin problem out there, both using and dealing. It's a pretty potent cocktail, but my sister was determined to have the party there. The party was at 6, and my original plan was to drive out with my sister and her friends to help get it set up, and then drive back home with her. However, I got called into work and had to stay until 4, so I told my sister I would drive up by myself as soon as I was done. She warned me that it was pretty easy to get turned around on those country roads, but I had Google Maps to help me, so I didn't worry about it. The drive up was fine. It was late September, my favorite time of the year, and the scenery was surprisingly pretty. I found the place, no problem, and helped with some last-minute setup until my brother-in-law showed up. The party was a lot of fun and lasted till about 11, when the hall closed. I was one of the last people to leave, having stayed behind to help my sister and her friends stack chairs. We ended up not actually heading out until almost midnight, and by that point, I was exhausted. My sister once again warned me about being careful on the back roads, but I'd gotten up there okay, so I wasn't too concerned about driving home. I hugged her goodbye, hopped into my car, and started working my way back to the highway. Unfortunately, in my sleepy state, I misjudged which road I was supposed to turn off at as I reached the exit for the highway. I ended up turning down an entirely different road that ran parallel to it instead. It was another heavily wooded and narrow back road. I started looking for somewhere I could pull in to turn around. After driving maybe 200 yards, I spotted a gravel embankment and decided to pull in there so I could get turned around. I pulled in and made a sharp U-turn so I could head back up the road, and as I lifted my head to check no one was coming, I saw something in my driver's side mirror. A figure in a dark blue t-shirt and jeans, with long black hair and a pale face, illuminated in my brake lights. My heart jumped into my throat as I gasped in fright. But after a second of pure panic, I realized that the pale face was actually a mask, one of those cheap plastic white ones you get at costume stores. I immediately felt like an idiot. It was almost October, so obviously this was a Halloween decoration. This embankment probably led to someone's driveway, and the family who lived there probably had tons of things like that in their yard. It took a moment to unclench my hands from the steering wheel and let my heart rate get back to normal, but I ended up catching a glimpse of the thing in my mirror again. And I then realized that the embankment didn't lead to a driveway. There was nothing else behind me but tall grass and trees. I briefly wondered why anyone would put a Halloween decoration out in the middle of nowhere. And then, the decoration took a step forward. I slammed on the gas and shot forward, eventually getting back onto the main road and onto the highway. I don't think I stopped shaking until I reached my town's city limits a half an hour later. Looking back, I definitely wasn't in any danger. I was in a car, all the doors were locked, and I could easily have run down whoever that creep was if they tried anything. If they'd gotten even one step closer when panic mode set in, that's probably what I would have done. It was probably just a kid or a local druggie in some crappy mask, giving motorists a good scare and not really thinking about the consequences. But still, it was definitely one of the creepiest moments of my life, and I'm still nervous driving down secluded country roads at night to this day.
When I was 13, my parents sent me to an all-girls fitness camp to work on becoming the best version of me. Well, let's be honest here. It was a fat camp, and it was as horrible as you could imagine. Bad food, all-day exercise, and god-awful counselors. The camp took place on a college campus, where they had us sleeping in dorms of 2 girls per room, but I had high hopes that it wouldn't be a complete waste of a summer, as my roommate seemed like a great girl. Let's call her Mary. We had similar interests and the same style. It seemed like a perfect match. We would chat late into the night, planning our escape from the camp, bemoaning having to give up our cell phones, though I had secretly managed to sneak mine in. We talked about our families and how much they sucked for sending us here. To be honest, I was surprised that she was even at the camp. She was actually pretty fit, and her parents had signed her up for the whole summer, whereas mine had only signed me up for 2 weeks. Only 2 days into being at this place, I was pulled aside by another girl who I'd become close friends with. She warned me that Mary had a lot of issues, and the reason she hadn't had a roommate for so long was because no one else wanted to room with her. I brushed it off, thinking it was just rumors and other girls being mean. That day at lunch, Mary seemed rather mad at me, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. So when I got a chance, I asked her what was up. She ranted at me about how everyone was being so mean, and if I was going to leave too. She went on to explain how this one girl she was rooming with switched rooms because she made friends with this popular girl, and that she made up lies to be popular. And I believed her. We continued hanging out, and only now do I realize how she was keeping me from hanging out with anyone else. Near the end of my first week, the camp took us on a long walk over to the local pool. It was a big deal, as it was super hot and only a once-a-week activity. Mary and I were super excited to go. When we got there, we quickly claimed some chairs and left our stuff there. As Mary had been at the camp for several months, she didn't have to pass some stupid "can you swim" test that I assume is mandatory in most camp settings. So we were separated for about 20 minutes. After I passed with flying colors, I jumped into the pool and just started floating around. I heard her calling my name and saw her waving me over to the deep end of the pool. I swam over and asked her what was up, and she said she wanted to show me something. Next thing I know, her hands are around my neck, and she's shoving me underwater. Now, I am a good swimmer, and I am very capable of holding my breath for quite a long time, but never in my life had anything like this ever happened to me, and I panicked and opened my mouth to scream. Luckily, before my mind had even processed what was happening, I had kicked up my legs and shoved her back, and made a desperate escape. Somehow, I managed to swim away and pull myself out of the pool. As I caught my breath and began to process what had just happened, I looked back at her. She was just staring at me, not having moved. I quickly grabbed my stuff and ran into the bathroom, called my mom. I was in tears as I explained what happened, and it was very obvious she didn't believe me. I stayed in that bathroom until we left to go back to the camp. I didn't leave the counselor's side the entire walk back. When we arrived back at the camp, I was pulled aside by one of the women in charge. She very rudely demanded I give her my cell phone. I, of course, denied having one, and asked why she thought I did. She told me that my parents had called about some assault that had happened to me, and they told them I had called. I quickly made an excuse, saying I had borrowed a phone from a lady at the pool, and thankfully they bought it. They told me that I would be moved to a new room the next day, that I had to spend the night with Mary one last time. Furiously, I begged them to please let me sleep on the floor of another girl's room, but they insisted I was being melodramatic. As soon as I was left alone, I raced to the closest bathroom and called my mom. That's when I learned the truth about Mary. I wasn't her second roommate, nor her third, fourth, or fifth. I was the 6th girl to stay in a room with her. 3 of her roommates had left camp early, and the other two had switched rooms at the first opportunity. All 5 other girls had made allegations of violence from Mary against them, but the camp refused to do anything and just insisted she was just a troubled girl who wanted to make friends. Or, as they told my parents, well, she has had some issues in the past. That night I didn't sleep at all, and neither did Mary. She sat up in bed, staring at me all night. I could feel her watching me. I had my phone clutched in my hand, with 911 dialed and ready to call at any moment. I practically cried when the sun came up. That day I was moved into a new room in a different building, and somehow managed to break my foot in the process, so my parents drove up and took me home, with a cast on my foot to commemorate my time there. To this day, I have had issues from what this girl did to me, and I have never been able to live with roommates or make friends as easily ever since. In 2015, I was 19 years old and working for the summer at a Bible camp for inner city kids. I'm going to leave out the city name, but just know that obviously crime occurs frequently in big cities, and this one was no different. I had been assured that this neighborhood was in the process of being gentrified, and that they had just opened up a hipster coffee shop and a dog park right down the street. Just to give you a really clear visual, this neighborhood had dilapidated houses with trash out front, right next to houses with immaculate yards and square, modern architecture. The Bible camp where I was working was essentially just a huge 2-story house with a large fenced-in yard. Again, we were assured that we were safe though, because we had bars on the windows, the outer doors locked automatically when they shut. The camp was conducted downstairs, and the summer counselors, there were 4 of us, lived in the small upstairs that was off limits during the day to the kids. Our camp ran 5 days a week, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then the time was ours to explore the rest of the city or whatever. One weekend night in July, we were all just hanging in the house making a spaghetti dinner. We each got our own stipend for food, so we divided it accordingly for meals and then bought our own snacks and stuff. We were also in charge of preparing lunch and snacks for the kid on the camp days, so we had 2 fridges and 2 pantries. As you can probably guess, we labeled them camp fridge and pantry, and the other one staff fridge and pantry. We were all also super petty, wrote our names all over our snacks in the fridge. My best friend worked at the camp with me. We'll call her Chris. And it was our turn to cook that night, so I went into the staff fridge to grab the ground beef. I immediately noticed that my case of Go-Gurts was gone. They were my go-to snack, and I bought like 3 cases a week. I had just opened this last box like an hour before to have one, and then left it in front of the ground beef. It sounds crazy, but I knew I did. I closed the fridge door and headed to the dining room, Chris closely behind me, to yell at everyone else and see who stole my Go-Gurt. That night, in addition to Chris and myself, there were 2 other summer counselors, 2 permanent counselors that lived in the area, and then the cousin of one of the permanent counselors. Everyone looked at me wide-eyed and looked around blankly. I figured it was the cousin because I had never met her before, so I sucked it up. Just said, "Whatever. Just if something has a name on it, please don't eat it." Then pulled Chris back into the kitchen to finish up the spaghetti. We all ate dinner, and then the 2 permanent counselors volunteered to do dishes because we let them eat with us. The rest of us headed back upstairs to get comfy in the sitting room on the couches and turn on Family Guy. We're only like 2 minutes in when the cousin, we'll call her Sarah, says, "Wait, I can't find my phone or wallet." I pause the show and roll my eyes, still annoyed about the Go-Gurt. Chris says, "Where did you last have them?" And Sarah says she left them on the couch before we went downstairs to dinner. Naturally, we all start looking around the small room, turning over couch cushions, looking under the couches, behind them, under blankets, really wherever. Finally, we say, "Are you sure you didn't leave them downstairs?" She agrees to head downstairs to look with the other 2, while Chris and I went to our room, which was connected to the sitting room. We flopped down on the bottom of our bunk bed, and I proceed to talk bad about Sarah, who I feel is ruining our chill night. Our door is opened, and I'm shocked when I see a hand kind of sneak into view like it's going to grab the door frame. I say, "Hey, did you find them?" Thinking that Sarah or the other two have somehow made it back upstairs without me hearing, and have heard me talking for the past 5 minutes. But the hand immediately disappeared out of the doorframe, and there was no response. I look at Chris. She's looking back at me confused, because she never saw the hand. I quickly explain what happened, then we both jump to head to the top of the stairs. We yell down for the others. They yell back that they haven't found them yet. By this point, I was freaked out. So was Chris, who was up there with us. We start looking around upstairs in our bedroom, the other bedroom, and in the sitting room. We find nothing and no one. We decide not to say anything yet, because I might sound insane, and also how could someone have gotten downstairs so fast without us hearing them? When we get downstairs, Sarah is super upset and crying. Her cousin says, "Come on guys, someone take her stuff." But Chris and I both know we didn't, and we say so. Sarah screams that obviously someone took them. We should just be honest, and then things get heated. I finally decide to tell them about the hand, because I feel like it will maybe reduce the tension between us. It does, but then everyone panics. We run around the house like maniacs, looking in every closet or hiding place the kids use. We find nothing, no one. We end up calling our camp director to come over, because the situation has just devolved into chaos. When he gets there, we're all sitting huddled in the foyer, freaked out. We explain what we can. He just doesn't seem convinced that someone was in the house, and threatens to call the cops if one of us doesn't give Sarah back her things. Well, none of us fess up, so he calls the cops, and they come over and search the property, take our statements. It seems so dumb to repeat our stories, but we didn't have much to go off of but a feeling. They do write a report for stolen property, and that makes Sarah feel better at least. With the house secure, everyone leaves, except us 4 summer counselors who live there. We spend the night in the same room with the door barricaded, reassuring ourselves that we're being stupid, and the phone and wallet will actually turn up somewhere random, and we'll laugh about it. Fast forward a few days. We've relaxed a bit. We haven't found Sarah's things like we expected, but nothing else weird has happened, and we've been occupied with the kids and just our jobs in general. The kids have all gone home at this point, and it's just the 4 of us again in the house. We finish cleaning up the outside, lock the gate, and head in the dining room door. We're all hungry and want snacks. Chris gets to the kitchen first and says, "Someone left the kitchen door open again." I mean, it's kinda weird, but kids go in and out of that door all day, so of all the doors to be open, this one's the least weird. She shuts it, then I notice that the staff fridge door is also cracked open. Who knows what possessed me, but I go, "Oh no, y'all, he's back." We all laugh because we think it's ridiculous. Chris grabs a broom, holds it as a weapon, and says, "Let's get him." She threw open the pantry door and screamed, "We know you're in here. Show yourself." Jokingly, of course. I'm following behind her, laughing, but I start to inexplicably feel uneasy and nervous. She continues her charade into the next room, throwing open 2 more closet doors, then moves into the front room and opens that closet door. She starts another confident, "We know you're..." She stops mid-sentence and screams so loudly the skin on my neck prickles. Then she throws the broom in the closet and sprints out the front door, leaving it open. My heart is pounding so hard at this point, but I'm thinking she's messing with us, so I turn around and go the other way into the foyer and out the front door. I see her booking it down the street towards the coffee shop. As soon as I turn back around to find the others, he's just there, An older man, looks really dirty, has hardly any teeth. He's just grinning at me. He has his hands up and says, "I didn't mean no harm," while slowly backing down the street and in the other direction. It's so creepy, because even though he says this, it's like he doesn't mean it. It's like his tone and the grin are mocking me. I'm frozen for a second, and I sputter out, "You can't just leave." And he just says again, with that grin, "I didn't mean no harm," then turns and runs. I fumble in my pocket for my phone and dial 911 and go to follow him, but as soon as I reach the edge of the house, he's gone. The next events are kind of like a blur. Sounds wild, but we really all thought that we were just freaking ourselves out. No way we actually just saw someone in the house. The cops took our statements and reminded us that we needed to keep the door shut at all times no matter what. Our camp director profusely apologized for not believing us at first. My parents wanted me to come home for the remainder of the summer, but I didn't think much else could happen. Chris was the one who had it the worst. She was terrified to stay in that house. She told me later that when she opened the door, he was just grinning at her with dead eyes, like he was waiting for her to finally find him. She said that she will never forget his face. We're still best friends at almost 30 years old, and I still can't bring up that summer to her if she hasn't been drinking. That's basically it. I think what kept me up at night was just the unanswered questions. Like, how long had he been in the house? Why did he randomly decide to take the phone and wallet of the one person who didn't work there? Had he listened to our private conversations? Watched us get dressed and shower? How much food had he stolen that we didn't notice? Where had he gone when we were looking for him on spaghetti night? What hiding places did we miss? Was he under my bed at night or at any point during my stay? I don't know all these answers. I know I'll never have them. But I'm just thankful our interaction wasn't worse. A few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in North Georgia. As many of you might know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state, as well as being predominantly Christian. There are small Jewish communities and a few summer camps. I'd say this camp was more culturally Jewish than it was religious. There were no religious requirements, nor religion-specific focus. Rather, it was a place for kids who were often in the minority to come to camp and allowed them to meet other kids that were like them. Staff came from all over. We had many Australians, lots of Brits, and a few Israelis, and people from various areas of the USA. Each night at around 10, most of the staff was able to go out on the town for a couple of hours. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar and grab a few beers. It had been a hot day and was a humid night, so we decided to sit outside on the patio. For some backstory on the town, generally, we were extremely well received by the community, despite differences. We brought in lots of revenue for the town during the summer. We bought lots of supplies at the local Walmart, and often took the campers on tubing trips, or occasionally out to dinner after a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we had been out to bars in the area many times already that season. The 5 of us sat around a table, drinking and discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees typically would after work. About 30 minutes in, a white man in his 20s came up to our table. I distinctly remember a jagged scar on his cheek. Didn't think much of it at the time. He introduced himself and told us that he was having a party that night at his place. "Anyone can come," he said. "Black, white, gay, straight." I found it odd that he'd have to open his speech with that disclaimer. Of course the party should be open to everyone. Why did he feel the need to specify? But we'd all had a few beers, feeling pretty loose. He talked for a bit longer, and nothing really seemed off. We told him we were working at a camp in the area, couldn't stay out, so we'd probably be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went out to the parking lot to get into the car. As we approached it, we saw the same guy come out of the shadows. He had a buddy with him, with a shaved head. His expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed. He pounded his fist into his hand, and took off his shirt, revealing a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in my group, Kevin, immediately reacted by pulling a knife out of his back pocket. He asked what they wanted. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks, told us he was going to beat us down. Kevin started walking towards the two guys, but we pulled him back. He told us his buddies were on the way, and sure enough, some more guys started walking into the parking lot. It's all kind of blurry here. I remember jumping into one of the cars, pulling Kevin with us. It felt like we were surrounded, though there were probably only 7 or 8 of them. Rocks were thrown at the car. We sped off. My heart was beating like crazy, but we never went back to that bar. On the bright side, we told the story to a competing bar in town. The bartender lined up 6 shots, cheersed us, and said we'd always be welcome in his bar.
If you enjoyed this compilation, then check out this regularly updated playlist of true scary stories, and subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.